May we call this meeting to order. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Sheridan College. My name is Paul Young. I'm Sheridan College President, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to our roundtable tonight, where we'll be discussing facing challenges and creating opportunities for American Indian college students. Over the course of several weeks during the fall semester, 3 American Indian students at Sheridan College were targeted in 3 separate race hate incidents. And so our small campus, here in a community that many of us like to describe most often in idyllic terms, joined a shockingly long list of American college and university campuses where similar incidents took place during the fall semester of 2017. Faculty, staff, and other students at our college moved quickly to support the targeted individuals, taking steps to let them know they were loved and welcome here. We are and will be taking concrete actions to improve the safety and security of students at the college, including the installation of better access control systems and cameras in key locations around campus. Staff who work with students are receiving enhanced training in how to best serve American Indian and other underrepresented students. And faculty are beginning a conversation about our campus culture and ways in which we can adjust curricula to support diversity, equity, and inclusion. On the whole, I think we can be pleased with the steps we're taking. But these incidents have raised questions that go beyond immediate reactive solutions. We've had to ask ourselves, why don't more American Indian students attend our college? And as importantly, when they do, why don't they succeed? The purpose of tonight's meeting is to go beyond the very important safety and security measures and the cultural awareness steps we are taking, and to launch a deeper conversation about how to build a campus community where American Indian students can thrive. We also believe that this is not just a conversation for the college, but one that must involve the broader community as well. We are grateful for all of you being here in attendance, not just our panelists, but also the many community leaders and citizens here in the audience tonight. We'll be making a record of tonight's conversation, and we'll produce a report and with recommended next steps that we will share with all of you, our stakeholders. And again, I want to say thank you to all of you for being here for this important meeting. And now I want to introduce the facilitator for our conversation tonight, John F. Dulles. And in case you were wondering, as I was, whether his parents just arbitrarily decided to name him for a famous American, no, he is the grandson of the Secretary of State in the Eisenhower administration. John Dulles is president of the Human Rights Consultancy in Denver. In a federal career spanning 40 years, he worked for the Library of Congress, the Office of Economic Opportunity, held professional positions in the United States Commission on Civil Rights, in the Southwest region, where he was deputy director, the Western region, where he was senior analyst, and the Rocky Mountain region, where he served as director of a 7-state regional office for more than 12 years. He's directed public hearings and research projects on a wide range of human rights issues, including immigration, law enforcement, education, voting rights, and discrimination against Native Americans. He's written and published extensively, including reports on Native Hawaiian land rights, the U.S.-Mexico border relations, reservation border town discrimination, minority business in Alaska, and racial injustice in South Dakota. Mr. Dulles has conducted extensive training and educational seminars, served as a consultant with the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, and provided technical assistance to tribal governments, including the Blackfeet and Navajo nations. He's currently working to mobilize greater minority participation in the political process and to promote racial reconciliation. Raised in Monterrey, Mexico, he is fluent in Spanish, was educated at the University of Arizona and the University of Texas, Austin, where he graduated with honors and was nominated for a Woodrow Wilson Fellowship. He's a passionate and effective educator for human rights. Please join me in welcoming John F. Dulles to Sheridan College and Sheridan Monument. Thank you.
Thank you, President Young, and I think I'm going to appoint you to be my marketing director.
He asked me not to read it all.
Yes, I did, but I appreciate that. Anyway, thank you very much to the institution, to the president. I want to give special thanks to Dr. Leah Barrett, Vice President for Student Affairs, and Andrea Young, the administrative coordinator, who have done an outstanding, a masterful job, really, of organizing this event. Also a shout out to my good friend Rosa Salamanca of the Community Relations Service, Department of Justice, who actually introduced me to Sheridan. And I met with the president this morning, and he's invited me to come back in August for the Jazz Festival, I believe.
Nobody in here knows about yet.
Well, okay, but I would.
Oops.
Anyway, I plan to return in August. Okay. Well, welcome to our roundtable discussion, which will focus on improving educational experiences and outcomes for American Indian students on this campus. I will serve as the moderator for the session, and so I'm going to give you a little idea of how the agenda will proceed. I'll introduce each of our panelists, and we're very fortunate to have a very distinguished panel of experts on this subject matter. And then I will be asking Dr. Makonamau, and I probably thought, hey, don't laugh, I've been working on it. Makomenau. See, I use my Spanish, but anyway, he can correct me. Anyway, he is with the American Indian College Fund. He is going to provide us with a summary of data, which is going to serve as a baseline, which we all need before we engage in the dialogue. Okay? Following his presentation, I'm going to ask each member of the panel to briefly introduce themselves, and you can do it. Well, now that I've been given this great introduction, I could say do it in 30 seconds, but if you want to take more time, please do. And then to respond briefly to the presentation of the data, just specifically to Matthew's presentation. After we do that, then we're going to open it up among our panelists, and we're going to enter into a dialogue, and that dialogue is going to focus very specifically on providing specific recommendations that might realistically be implemented by the college to help improve educational experiences and outcomes of American Indian students. In addition, and this is very important, I want you to help us figure out how we can help educate the broader non-native community to better understand the history of this region and the importance of honoring, respecting, and celebrating tribal contributions. So I'm going to ask that we try to stay very positive in our outlook. I believe that this is just going to be the beginning of a continuing dialogue that will include faculty, staff, and students, and hopefully members of the community at large. We are hoping that we can wrap up our panel discussion as early as possibly 8:15 or 8:30, because the president made it very clear to me that he wants audience participation. So that's going to constrict us a little bit in the earlier part, but we're going to make up for it because we want to hear from you, your comments, your questions, and I think that's very, very important if this is an all-inclusive type of event. Really important. So now I will introduce the panelists, and then we'll ask Dr. Makomenau. Again, I'm saying it in Spanish, so you can't make fun of me. Because my Spanish is my first language, and I'm comfortable with that. Okay, well, first of all, Paul Littlelight, to my left, is the Veterans Coordinator, Crow Nation. And then we have Leslie Shakespeare, who is a tribal councilman for the Eastern Shoshone Tribe. We're very fortunate to have with us a member of the legislature, Representative Lloyd Larson from Fremont County. Thank you for being here. And this is easy for me because I'm almost half Mexican. So I don't know how you pronounce your name, but I call you Angela Jaime. And that's what I'm going to call you. I love that name. She is chair of the University of Wyoming American Indian Studies Department and also associate director, School of Culture, Gender and Social Justice. Wow, what a powerful title that is. Okay, and we have Kyle Ethelbaugh. Kyle is, where are you, Kyle? Here you are. You are the director of the TRIO programs at the University of Utah in Salt Lake. Thank you for being with us. And we have with us Alma Brown, and Alma Brown is the director of the Sky People Higher Education with the Northern Arapaho Tribe. And last but certainly not least, my friend of many, many years who I've worked with in Denver, Heidi Kutcher. She's an attorney with the U.S. Department of Education, Office for Civil Rights, Region 8 in Denver, Colorado. And she is a wonderful resource on issues of discrimination and education at all levels. So we're very, did I miss anybody? I think I got all our pals. But anyway, as you can see, it's a very, very distinguished group, and thank you so much. And no, I'm not. No, I'm introducing him now because he's our next speaker. So actually, I haven't missed Matthew Makominau, and that's how I'm going to pronounce it. But he is. He's had quite an experience. And Matthew, if you could just very briefly tell us a little bit about yourself before you go into your presentation. But that's going to be. We're going to hear the presentation from Matthew, and then we will proceed with our roundtable discussion. So I will turn it over to you.
Okay. I'm nervous to say my name because I know you're all waiting to how it's pronounced. Bonjour, Matthew Makamino, Michigan Dodom. I'm the Grand Traverse Bay Band of Ottawa and Chippewa Indians, originally from Michigan. All right. We're back there. So we're up here. I tried to do this because I know people from Wisconsin were trying to steal our hand. It was ours, and so it's not Wisconsin, it's Michigan. Although we don't actually acknowledge the UP, so we probably should. But thank you. Thank you, President Young. Thank you, John. Thank you all for having me here to be in this community. I'm very happy to be here. I was asked to do a brief presentation on data. I'm qualitative by nature, so I tried to grab as much as I could on the quantitative data, and we'll kind of go through, and I'll speed my presentation up as well as we go through. So I'm at the American Indian College Fund. We are the largest provider of American Indian scholarships. And if you applied and didn't get a scholarship, I don't actually award the scholarship part. So I've had people giving me some dirty looks sometimes when they find out. But no, so I'm happy to be here, and I will go ahead and get started. So. A little bit about my background? Yeah, so I got my PhD at Michigan State University. Like I said, I'm originally from Michigan in higher education administration. I've spent my entire career working with Native communities for Native students. I've been on the Board of Regents for a tribal college. I've taught at Montana State University. I've also worked at the University of Utah, Central Michigan University. So yeah, so I've been around education and Native students for a lot, and it's my passion. I enjoy working with them, helping them achieve their goals and succeed. And I was a first generation. Actually, no, I wasn't. I was a second generation student, but technically was a first generation student in terms of support and in terms of going through college. So I understand the challenges that we face. Okay, so I'll go ahead and get started. I'm very proud of this presentation. Usually my team does my PowerPoints for me, and I think they got tired of doing it, so they showed me how to use Canva, and so this is my first attempt, so be nice on me with this. Okay, so before I get started, the first thing I want to talk about with data, anytime you have data, is to really think about some different challenges with that, especially when we're talking about with American Indian and Alaska Native students and what that might mean. So we are, again, roughly 1% of the population, whether that's at the institution, whether that's in the nation. Again, it's roughly 1%. And because we're roughly 1%, we often, sometimes people say we're the invisible group, right? Where we get left out. So you might see statistics broken down, and it may say African American, Asian American, and then you won't see American Indian, Alaskan Native, and there's various reasons. It might be because there wasn't a significant number of numbers. Maybe it was a certain group isn't reporting, right? Maybe the BIE, Bureau of Indian Education, doesn't report a certain number that goes to the National Student Clearinghouse, and again, I'll talk about that later. So that whole population number might not actually be included. Incomplete data, right? And again, for those of us who work in data, sometimes that's can be ugly at times in terms of trying to sort through all that stuff and figure out if everything's there. So did not meet reporting standards is another thing you might see when you read the data. So again, when you get reports and read data, make sure you read the fine print a lot of times, because that's where a lot of this stuff will come in. Native or not Native, again, did the report, how do you identify Native American or American Indian, Alaska Native, who's included, who's not included in that? Now that kind of bored you with data in terms of thinking about it. But again, what my friend Amanda Cicchini always says is greater than 1, right? So we're greater than 1%. And even though we are 1%, that 1% matters, right? And it's important to let our students know that it matters. And again, with 1%, you can have a bigger impact a lot of times too, right? So that's the important thing to remember, is even though it is 1%, that 1% does matter, and it's important to be supportive. Okay. So I included this, although this is more from K-12 in terms of bullying. I didn't really have anything. I feel like I skipped the slide, but that's okay. And this is just kind of talk about things that students might face. And this is just in general of bullying and different types of events. Maybe I didn't, okay. And again, I don't know if the Civil Rights Department has one on higher ed, but I wasn't able to find that in times to get it. Yeah, I was trying to pull it. So I went with the K-12 version, just kind of give you a sense of that. Whether it's being bullied at school, different types of names. And again, as our Native students here, I'm guessing you can all probably guess what my nickname was in high school, right? Chief. Right? You know, again, very creative. So it could be names, it could be smaller things, it could be, you know, I was talking with some of the students, and sometimes as Native people, you know, usually when my thing is if a Native person says something's racist, I usually believe it, because a lot of the students I work with, they'll have things and they're like, oh, that's just ignorance, or oh, that's, you know, it's not usually until it's something really big before they'll say it's racist a lot of times. And so sometimes it's, you know, we, again, being the 1%, you know, that's something that we deal with on a daily basis, so sometimes you kind of get used to it, and so you kind of let go through it. And so I always remember, I think it was my high school principal came up and asked me if he thought it was okay for people to call me Chief, and of course, again, I was a high school student. I was like, oh yeah, but really, you know, if he came to me and said that, and you knew it was, probably was on him to really take charge of that sometimes. So sometimes we can't always put it back on the students. Sometimes we have to make sure we speak when we know what is right and what is wrong as well. Okay. Oops. Now it wants to go. Okay, so high school graduation rates. So I pulled this, and again, I pulled from the Wyoming Department of Education. And so these, you might have more up-to-date numbers than what I pulled. Roughly 80% of all students graduate. For American Indian, Alaskan Native students, it was at 53%. For NCS, for everyone, it's roughly 83%, and for American Indian, Alaskan Natives, we're roughly 68%. And again, so I'll go through some of these slides, and we'll kind of see, and we'll think about when we talk about Native representation on colleges. Again, I didn't even put into the terms of, I know a lot of Native students sometimes may drop out in middle school as well, and I didn't get that data as well. So we're losing students from the high school graduation as well when we think about college representation. This is college readiness. I pulled this again from the ed.gov civil rights, ACT, SAT. And so this again is students who are taking the ACT or SAT. And again, as we know, not all colleges require that. Tribal colleges, community colleges don't offer us to require, but that again, gives you an idea of where we're at. So 0.8% for everyone, and then Wyoming here at 2.2 and Montana at 6.8%. And so again, you can kind of see that again, thinking about Native students being 1% of the population, and you can see here in Wyoming and Montana, we have some that are college ready. So the next part is college access. So again, so we're losing students from, this is why I have the staff. So college access, right? So immediate transition to college. Those students who are graduating college and going on to, or graduating high school and going to college that next fall. And so NCES has a percent, 69% for everybody, but again, this is where there is no national number for American Indian, Alaska Native, just for whatever reason it might be that they're not included in there in that aspect. So I kind of pulled some other states. South Dakota does theirs with white or non-white. And again, that's at roughly 47. I didn't touch it anyway, this guy's. Okay, so 47.7%. And then Washington at 39.8%. Montana was roughly 20%. And again, with the Montana number, you have to think about a lot of the tribal colleges might not be represented in terms of that number. Because again, if the tribal college doesn't report to the National Student Clearinghouse, and they're the ones that most colleges report to, then that number won't be in there. And so there may be students who are going to college, to tribal colleges, and then that number won't be included. Okay.
There you go. So keep it in that direction when you're not using it.
Okay. All right. So again, so that's where that's at. And then I found some other numbers again because my work consumes me. So it was Friday night, and again, I'm usually in bed by 9 o'clock on most nights anyways. And so it was Friday night, and my kids and everybody else is in bed, and it's 10:30, and I was like, well, I'm not tired. And then so I've been really trying to find like specific high school numbers of the schools that we work with. And then I didn't talk about in my program. So my specific work, I do work in college access. We work with reservation-based high school students to help them with the entire college access process to go to college, apply to college, FAFSA, all the stuff. In that, we work with those students, and then we also work with transfer students. And we have also developed a college readiness curriculum that we've awarded some grants to 4 TCUs to implement in their communities. So I've been looking for these specific numbers, and I couldn't find them. And then this Friday night, I went down and started searching, and I finally found some of the schools, a lot of the schools in Washington, South Dakota, and Wisconsin. And so what I found out is the numbers for the reservation-based high school students in those states, the number's even lower than what that state level is. So the ones where the reservation-based schools are often in the 20%, 10%, 8%, right? And again, if we're looking at that and comparing that to 69%, that's a huge, I mean, that's a college access crisis, right? That's very, something's going on there. So we're losing students in graduation, but we're also not, we're losing them, getting them to college as well. So there's a huge opportunity there. I got okay. So college enrollment, again, roughly 0.8%. And again, you can look at this, even for the last 10 years, it's roughly been the same number. You probably look back the last 20 years, 30 years, again, in the history of American Indian education, starting with, Harvard, or the very first part of trying to recruit Native students. You can look at the challenges they faced in those early days with recruiting and keeping students, and you can see that the same challenges in the 50s and 60s is the same stuff. It's the same thing that we keep hearing over and over. So while this is a relevant and current topic, it's certainly not a new one. It's one that's been going on for quite a while in terms of trying to solve. American Indian Alaska Native faculty, so roughly 3,533 Native faculty out of 807,032 faculty, and this includes instructors, assistant professors, and the like. And then you can look at, there's roughly 4,724 degree granting institutions. So as you can see, there's not enough Native people even to fill out every single college. So not every college could have one Native faculty member with these numbers, and often many don't, and some of them may have more. So that's something to think about too when we think about that Native experience, is having faculty and staff on campus. College graduation, so again, this is 4-year, 5-year, 6 years for natives. 24% of those who start will graduate within 4 years, 36.95, and then 41% for within 6 years. So again, looking at that cycle again of where we're losing Native students. And I was hoping to have a slide. I was telling my colleague that Dr. Brian Brayboy has a slide where it starts out roughly, they say of 100 Native students starting in 9th grade, and like one will graduate with a bachelor's degree. And I wasn't able to get that slide, so I wasn't able to show it. But again, so I was still trying to show that same idea as we go through. And this is degrees conferred. And so bring this up here. As you can see, again, mostly this is for Native students, 64% for female and 36% for male. And that tends to be the truth throughout higher ed. And again, I was talking to our, it was the last slide. It was the I had it going that way. That's all right. I think that was the last slide, and now we'll get to our panel here. But again, I was talking with the fellow students here, and I was like, oh, well, there's no Native males. I was like, I was just asking where they're at. But again, so that's another issue too, is the Native males and recruiting and getting them through and going to college is certainly important too. So, so I appreciate you all taking the time and listening to me. Again, I'm as my colleagues tell me, I'm getting into that old man club. So me and my data person that we walk with, we're called our old man club. But we try to get rid of that name to get other people to walk with us, but nobody really is taking us up on it. So we're going to keep that name. But as I was saying, as I get older, I start to talk a little bit more. So if you knew the 19-year-old me, we would have been done like 20 minutes ago. So it's the evolution. So you students out there, if you're not comfortable speaking in front of people now, just keep at it, because you'll get it. And then you'll be talking too much, like myself. So thank you for listening to me. Go ahead.
My wife gave me some good advice. She said, John, you know that when you're talking, you can't learn anything. So I've tried to cut back, because I used to say, if you put a microphone in front of John Dulles, you'll never wrestle it back. So maybe I should have gone into politics. I'm not sure I would have been successful. Yeah, I have a couple of statistics, and this is from nativepartnership.org. I'm not sure what it is. But it says that more than 60% of U.S. high school students go on to college, while only 17% of American Indian students are able to continue their education after high school. And the other one that was quite striking, while 28% of Americans complete college, only 13% of Native Americans hold a college degree. Those are astounding figures. But anyway, thank you very much, Matthew. That's very helpful. I'm going to start on my left, and I'm going to ask each panelist in turn to briefly introduce yourself, because I wasn't able to do that. I'm sorry, I didn't have the extensive bio that Paul had on me, but I'll ask you to do that. And then just a quick kind of response to the data. And then after we complete that, then we'll get into a full discussion of what this campus, what this institution can do to better the experiences and the outcomes that we've seen in the presentation. Heidi Kutcher, I'll let you go first.
Hi, I'm Heidi Kutcher. I'm an attorney with the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights. I'm out of the Denver office, which covers Wyoming. And I've been there for over 16 years. I was lucky enough when I started to have a chief attorney in my office who was my boss, who was from Blackfeet. And so he pulled me in right away to a case up in Flathead Reservation. And that was one of my first cases I ever did with the Office for Civil Rights. And I'm probably the national expert on American Indian law in civil rights and education. I've been fortunate enough to work with John and an interagency task force in Denver to put on, I don't know, what are we, 6, 7 years now?
At least.
Yeah, our annual conference on it's called Pathways to Respecting American Indian Civil Rights, and we do it in Denver every year, and it's free. And it's a good way to make sure we keep in contact with the American Indian community, because the hardest thing that I have is I don't hear from the American Indian community as much as I need to. And so that's the struggle I always have in doing my job is I'm a mostly complaint-driven agency, so we take complaints from anyone in the public, and we're free, and we investigate all types of discrimination, including race discrimination, sex discrimination, disability discrimination, age discrimination. But we have to get a complaint. So in order for me to act, I really need complaints from people. So I need to hear about things that are happening in your communities, and so that we can come in and assist. For the data, I think the hardest thing is why as long as I've been working with the community for 16 years, it's why do we have dropout numbers? Why is this happening? Why are we not adequately supporting our Native students? And in Denver, we have such a large urban Indian population that they do a little bit better, but especially in small communities where there's not a lot of kids, it's hard to, I wish we could do more to help encourage them to continue and to not just finish high school, but say college is an option. You can do this. There's no reason why you can't. And so that's, I think, the struggle I think everybody in the community that I've talked to talks about, which is why it's so important to remind ourselves that it starts in high school. It's not just that it's that there's an issue just when they get to college. It's the issues usually start in high school. And that usually, from what I see, a lot of the issue is a form of harassment. And students deal with harassment from preschool on. And I think I'm struck by what Matthew said of his principal knew enough to come to him and say, are you uncomfortable with this? It's great that he asked, but that there was his cue that yes, there is a problem. If you are going to feel like you need to ask that kind of question, the answer is yes. This is not okay to be doing this. Yes, I need to do something. So as community, I always try to encourage people that if you have a feeling that there is something probably not okay, then you're probably right, and you should probably work to not just ask, is it okay that they call you this, or what can I do to help so that this stops, so that the student doesn't have to advocate and tell you there's a problem. They can just help you find the solution.
The commission had some hearings on education in Montana, I think in Billings a number of years ago. We had a panel of students, and they were primarily juniors and seniors, high school students. And I said, where are the men? Where are the boys? They said, oh no, they've dropped out by this point. They're no longer in school. Okay, thank you, Heidi, and she's a great resource. She has business cards, and her services are free, and she is an expert attorney on American Indian education. And we will now turn to Alma Brown. And Alma, if you could give us the benefit of a little background information and response to the data. Thanks.
Dos hinawanase na asahina hinanaina na nanata anabitena. My name is Alma Brown. I'm from the Northern Arapaho tribe, and I'm glad to be speaking with you tonight. I come from the K-12 sector, and so I really do think that this starts earlier on than high school. It starts in kindergarten, and so I've just come to the higher education realm within the last few years, looking at the data, looking on why my students from K-12 aren't succeeding in college and what we could do to ensure that they do. And in reference to the data, I think that we need to look at it from the point of view of, out of that 1%, let's look at what is going right with that 1%, and let's look at those students who are successful. And from there, that's where we're going to find our challenges, and we're going to be able to build on those challenges by looking at what we're doing right, but those students are how they're finding success, and what we can do to ensure that the rest of the students are successful as well.
Wow, making my job easy, aren't you? Kyle, and you all have cards, don't you, with, or something with the names of our presenters? Okay, good. Kyle, you're next.
Thank you. Daguta kuda dashi ashadana sini. Kyle Ethelbagan seshi tetlikaisian indeshli ashok kunichi sitala di arafahu crow ke shoshoni was a down touch day he could no haha and la kokojogo no haha la. First and foremost, I want to acknowledge our brothers from the states from that we're coming to that surround us for welcoming us to your homelands. First and foremost, that's always of utmost importance whenever having a conversation that involves the community, that they be acknowledged first. And that's what we were taught, and that's one of the reasons why individuals from American Indian backgrounds introduce themselves by in their traditional languages, because that was what was first. So I want to say thank you all for having us here. I am a visitor. I'm a White Mountain Apache from the Fort Apache Indian Reservation, born and raised in White River, Arizona. Born and raised on a border town, and I was a participant in the federal TRIO programs, and I am director of federal TRIO programs at the University of Utah right now. I got my degrees. My undergraduate degree I got in cultural and linguistic anthropology from the University of Arizona, and my master's degree is in public health. So I have a little bit of a varying experience academically, but I've always worked within higher education. And so basically, my contribution stems from I think, a symbiosis of the disciplines that I come from and my background. Just to give you some sense of where I came from, there was 4 of us in my family, myself, my brother, my mother, and my father. I'm the only one living out of the 4 of us. I lost my mother at the age of 3 to domestic violence. My father was in prison. He later died from alcohol, consumption, abuse, cirrhosis, etc. My brother committed suicide at the age of 28, and therefore left myself to be the last one standing in my family. And I bring that up to say that this conversation is so much deeper and further than a group of individuals coming together to look at what's going on at the campus level. The institution does have responsibilities, and they must adhere to those. And I think the community needs to expect more from the institutions that we're sending our students. But we also need to expect more from their families as well. We perform at the level that which is expected of us. And the difficulty that I have with quantitative data a lot of times is it reinforces my what ifs. You know, it reinforces the negative side of the population from which I come. I'm more likely to drop out. I'm more likely to be killed. I'm more likely to drink myself to death. I'm more likely to be beat up. I'm more likely to do this, that, and the other. And I'm more likely not to be reported on. That's the very truth of it. I used to joke with my family and friends that I'm over 40 years old now, but when I was 35, I said, I'm past midlife because we don't live that long. American Indian males do not live to the age of 70. And so I've outlived all my family right now. So what goes beyond the data is the fact that there are human lives there, and we do perform to what is expected of us. So we as a community, in our families, in our homes, need to expect more from ourselves. And at the institutions, we need to expect more from the institutions so that I can feel safe when I come to campus, that I can make sure our students feel safe when they go to campus, and I can put my full faith into them when they actually graduate and become my leader and my chairman and my president. And so I really want to make sure that the humanity of the data does not get lost in the conversation, and that the community also be a very important and significant part of that conversation.
That was very impactful. We're proud that you're with us this evening. I'm going to skip Matthew for the time. I'll come back to you at the very end. But this is reactions to your statement. So, Angela, if you could give us a little background on yourself and then a response to the data.
Very good. So I'm Dr. Angela Hyman, and I echo what Kyle is saying, in that we always recognize those that have walked before us, our ancestors, and the people whose land we're on at this time. I'm Pitt River by my mom's side and Valley Maidu on my biological father's side. Northern California, my mountain is Mount Shasta. We're the Pitt River people. and the Badesi Band. So I spend a lot of time in New Zealand, and the way we introduce ourselves is through our family, our ancestors, our mountain, and our river. My role at the University of Wyoming is the Chair of American Indian Studies and Associate Director of our new school, Culture, Gender, and Social Justice, which is an exciting time. We're very much in love with our president at this point because she's been very supportive of our Native community. My office is housed in the new Native American Education Research and Cultural Center. And my favorite part of the day is when I hear the laughter of our students from the front of the house echoing down the hallways. It's such a joy to be able to be a part of this time at the University of Wyoming, simply because I didn't have that as a college student. I didn't have a place, a home, if you will, to go to, and I think that that is incredibly important. I, like Matthew, I'm a qualitative researcher, so when I see numbers, and as Kyle said everything so beautifully, I feel like, gosh, I shouldn't have followed him. But I really am always skeptical, and all my research comes from a very positive way. I try not to see it from a deficit perspective, because we want to hear the voices of our students. We want to hear the voices of our elders and our people. And so it's important that we use those counter narratives to bring that into the conversation and not to lose the humanity of it, I think is incredibly important. So well said, thank you. So that is my role, and so my response to the data is always, oh yeah, that was me, or wow, that's risen since I was in college, and oh, I'm one of the 3,400 and something faculty, and I guess I feel really comfortable being a part of that, because when I graduated with my PhD, and I did the numbers because my dissertation was on Native women academics. Like, what was their experience being a professor in the academy? And I became one of less than 100 Native women with a PhD. And that becomes incredibly significant in the road. And I say that because I know my ancestors would have paved the way for me to be able to do that. And now it's my right, my obligation, and my responsibility to do that for other Native students. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you very much, Angela. And we're fortunate we have students with us tonight, and we want to hear from them towards the end. But it will be interesting for me to hear the experience of an American Indian student residing and going to school in a predominantly white majority community, because there's got to be challenges there. And so I now will turn to our elected representative, Representative Lloyd Larson, and I will say that Dr. Young did mention to me that you pressed very hard for the college to respond in a positive manner to the incidents that occurred last September. So we appreciate your participation, your involvement, and your interest.
Thank you, Mr. Dulles, and we appreciate the college's response to that incident. It was critical that it take place in the way that it did. My name is Lloyd Larson. I live in Lander, Wyoming, which is on the border of the Wind River Reservation. I serve in the House of Representatives in the Wyoming Legislature and currently serve on the Appropriations Committee. I chair a task force on our state health facilities, and I also co-chair the Select Committee on Tribal Relations. I really feel a little inadequate at this table. There's a lot of very intelligent people. My life has mainly been digging ditches, and so you'll have to excuse me if I am not at the same level that you are. But I would share with you that I think that Wyoming's greatest assets are our natural resources, and the greatest natural resource that we have are our young people. And I think that our young Native American citizens are a resource that are underdeveloped and certainly underutilized. And for this state to move forward, it's going to be critical that we have access to their talents. So as chairman of the Select Committee on Tribal Relations, we've reviewed this same data that you have, and we've got it broken down a little more. And it is a conversation that is far deeper than anything we can take care of tonight. But the fact that we're having these conversations move us in the right direction. It's not solely here at post high school. It does go back to the family, and it does when you look at truancy and how do we do that. That's a responsibility that we feel the state has a responsibility to work at. That comes back to helping the tribes with family services issues and things of that nature. I would submit to this group that the state of Wyoming is very committed to working through with our sovereign friends and neighbors and citizens living on the Wind River Reservation to move forward to cross these hurdles and get to a place where we need to be. I would share with you that if you want to see the impact of education in the Native American community, you can look at my neighbor here, Leslie Shakespeare, and Chairman Brown, who is sitting next to my wife over here, who are currently on the Eastern Shoshone Council, the Northern Arapaho Council. His older sister is here with him. She's keeping him in line. Dr. Brown, by the way, Dr. Brown, by the way, Les has his master's in public administration. The chairman of the Shoshone Council has his bachelor's degree from the University of Wyoming. And what they have accomplished in the last 12 to 18 months on the Wind River Reservation has been nothing short of miraculous in bringing those entities together and working with the state of Wyoming. And that's what education does. And so we see what it can do, and we're committed to moving forward with that.
Another elected official, Councilman Leslie Shakespeare.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Leslie Shakespeare. I'm an enrolled member of the Eastern Shoshone Tribe. I have just completed my first year on my 4-year term on the Eastern Shoshone Business Council. It's been an interesting and stressful ride so far, but it's been worthwhile. Prior to being elected to the Shoshone Business Council, I worked with Governor Meade's office for a number of years as his tribal liaison. Prior to that, I worked in law enforcement with the Bureau of Indian Affairs for several years on the Wind River Reservation, and later was a training lieutenant down at the Artesia at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. And even before that, I worked as a director of juvenile services on the reservation after I graduated college. I graduated from the University of Wyoming, a bachelor's degree, got my master's degree at Norwich University in Vermont. So in my time, I've been able to travel this great state of ours from one end to the other. I've come to Sheridan a couple of times. I've met people who introduce themselves very proudly and say, I am 4th generation Wyomingite. Very proud of who they are, very proud of their communities. And my response is always, well, that's good. It's good you're proud of where you're from and who you are. But I counter that with, I am 5th generation before there was a Wyoming, before Wyoming was a territory, before Wyoming was a state. And we have a lot of individuals who share that, who are 5th generation, before there is even. And so you think about that, there is a history that goes with that. Before there's a Wyoming, there's a history of a people, there's a history of nations, there's an entire thing that when you go to these different places in Wyoming, Sheridan is one of them, you forget that history, or you don't know about it, or you're ignorant of it. And when you have incidences that happen like on Sheridan, here in Sheridan College, that's why. You don't have that background. You don't have that foundational knowledge. You don't have that ability to relate with somebody who may have a different color skin of you, who are the students back here, or look a little bit different. They come from a different background. When I was at the University of Wyoming, I always used the analogy of, this is a good way to look at it too. We're sitting here in the middle, looks like a bowl, and looks like a bowl of rice with a couple raisins in it. And that's exactly how it felt going to the University of Wyoming your very first time. You didn't see a lot of people who looked like you, who knew where you're from, who acted like you, who had that family connection. And so when you're thrust into that environment, you know, you start looking at that 1%, then you're like, well, am I even supposed to be here? And so you face that challenge right away, that self-doubt in your mind right away. Am I even supposed to be here? Should I even be here? All my family's back home. And so right from the start, you see that seeds of doubt in your head. And then you have instances that happen like this that kind of reinforce, well, I don't even want to be here now if I'm going to be treated that way. And so I'll stop there so we can get more of the conversation, but I just wanted to lay that foundation for everybody.
Well, it appears like we're really going to get real tonight, and that's what we want. We don't want just platitudes and rhetoric. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Paul Little Light, who's from the Crow Nation.
Excuse me. I'm an enrolled member of the Upsalaga Nation. Currently, I serve as the Cabinet Head Director of the Crow Veteran Affairs Office. My Crow name is Baratiet Chish, which means does everything well. I am from the Ties the Bundle clan. I'm a child of the Pigan. And normally, as Crows, we don't toot our own horn. So usually a clan uncle would do this for me. So I know there's some Crows in the crowd. So I'm not bragging myself up. I get scolded by my mom. So I serve the veterans in many capacities with the Crow tribe. We created the Upsalaga Warrior Apartments, which is a 15-bedroom homeless apartment complex for veterans living on the Crow Reservation. And we created the Upsalaga Veteran Cemetery, where one of our honored historians is buried there, Dr. Joe Medicine Crow. We were able to create the MOU with the VA that created the Native American direct loans for veterans living on trust land. We also created they didn't create it, but we were rewarded the IRT program, which was the Innovative Readiness Training Program with the Department of Defense, which came in and they trained to go to Bosnia or Iraq or anything like that. And so they came in and provided 16 homes for veterans living on trust land. That's kind of what my background is. I've also worked for the tribe as a finance director. I'm a graduate of Hardin High School. You can find my picture in the book Counting Coup by Larry Colton. That's also about a Native American basketball player, and it really explains border town issues. It's a great book, especially when I look back and read it. Looking at my young mind, I could see this racism going on, but I didn't recognize it until I read some of the book. And so I'm a graduate of Rocky Mountain College. I got a BS in Business Management, a minor in Native American Studies. I went to Grand Canyon University. I got a Master of Science in Leadership. I'm a veteran of the U.S. Army. I served in Bosnia. I'm stationed in Germany for 3 years. As far as the data goes, I wrote something down here that made me think, that's great data, but some of the stuff and the issues that we're dealing with, I wrote down here that it would be good to have an accurate reporting of the severity of discrimination in Sheridan. I know we have a lot of statistics on homelessness, poverty, and that type of deal, but I don't really think we understand the magnitude of the discrimination and the racism and the impact that it has inside on Native Americans. I myself experienced that at Rocky Mountain College. There was things going on that I didn't know. I was in a psychology class giving a presentation. I borrowed the laptop from the Native American Student Lounge, and as I was giving my presentation, I had friends up in the stands, and they were just listening to all this chatter going on. I wish I was Native American so I could get everything for free and get a free laptop and go to school for free and get free money. And I didn't know about this till later, but we also dealt with, we had Native American Heritage Month and put up teepees, and the next day the teepees were all ripped up on campus. And so I'm not one person to pull my race card. I've been dealing it for quite some time, and I'm sure older generations in here have dealt with discrimination and racism differently in the 60s and 70s. And so it's like these people who discriminate, racists, they've developed a new enhanced way of being discriminative and racist. And so it's no longer a sign in a door that says no Indians, no dogs. It's these little things like these snide remarks, like the look when you walk into a restaurant and people let you know that you're not supposed to be there. And this is I would consider this a border town. And so when we leave the border of the reservation and we come over here, we still have these borders, and they're invisible borders, and the people that are racist, they'll let you know that you're not supposed to be there. And they'll talk loudly about immigrant policies that just, irks me, because I know they know I'm listening, and so they let me know. And so I did, I did want to say this too. I wanted to welcome you to Crow Country. As far as the 1851 Laramie Treaty goes, Crow Country goes all the way down to Lander, all the way up to the Missouri where the Yellowstone meets. And so, welcome to Crow Country. One of our great chiefs, No Vitals, fasted up there on Clouds Peak, and that's how we decided where we were going to be back in the 1400s, is this, what we call God's country. And there's nothing worse than being rejected and feeling not wanted in your own country. And so part of what I feel is there's a lot of resentment within the community and the non-Indians. And one of the things that people are resentful is they have that stereotype that we're wards of the government and we get everything for free. Not only that, we have certain rights that other individuals don't have based on treaties with the government. For one thing, we get to hunt and go do whatever we want. Not whatever, but we get to hunt and fish on the reservation, and we don't have to pay for the licenses, fishing and stuff like that. When we do go to school in Montana, if you are Native American, your tuition is paid for based on an agreement with the state of Montana. And so these are resentments that non-Indians have against Indians, that we're alcoholics and that we're poor and impoverished and living on the corner. And so I think a lot of this stems from ignorance. And not only that, what Kyle mentioned, the parents, and I believe that with Native American students, but I also believe that with non-Indian students, because a lot of this transferred racism comes from parents back from the 1960s and 70s, and it's just passed from one generation to another. And as many of you know, we have generational trauma, and we're trying to get out of that as well. And so when these two cultures meet, there is a little bit of resentment. I know from Native Americans there's a little bit of resentment because you're sitting in our homeland right here. And one thing that bothers Native Americans is that when there's neutrality in the community, when there's silence from people and they look the other way, that's something that we find disrespectful, is when a few people speak out, but everybody else is looking to the left and looking to the right. And so when non-Indians don't recognize the history and the tragedies that happen with Native Americans, it's like, and I'll hear this from this generation and some older generations, like, why should we be held accountable for what other generations did? Our family didn't do that. My family came from Norwegian and we, did this on potatoes or whatever. Yes, but you directly benefited from all this blood that is shed from Native Americans. And so what bothers us is when we go into your house, Sheridan, and we look around and we see all our things and they're stained with blood, and then you come into your house and you don't recognize that blood on your furniture and you're acting like everything's okay. That's some of the stuff that gets Native Americans upset. And some of the things, I'm getting out of hand.
You'll have an opportunity to continue, because I did quite a bit of work on reservation border town discrimination and got my teeth cut in Farmington, New Mexico, which was called the Selma of the West. And so when you talk about all these dehumanizing occurrences, it really strikes home with the testimony that we've received. Okay, I'm sorry. I promise not to talk very much. Maybe you better take the mic away from me, Paul.
doing great.
Anyway, you're next, Dr. Young.
Oh, I get talk too.
Well, you're a member of our panel, our esteemed panel.
So you might want to take a vote on whether you should let me.
No, I get to make
A
that
a
decision.
couple of quick comments in response to the responses that I've heard. And first of all, I want to talk about the way I met Representative Larson. And so the first incident happened on the night of September 26th, which was a Wednesday, I believe. I heard about it from Dr. Leah Barrett, who put this together at 8 o'clock the next morning. I was traveling to Cheyenne to meet with the governor and the other college presidents for a meeting about our annual budget, our biannual budget request. And before that, we met at the Community College Commission, and Dr. Jim Rose, who's our executive director, had already heard from Representative Larson, because the incident, of course, got on Facebook and took off from there within hours. I worked on that through the day as I was in Cheyenne, and I was on my way back to up here to Sheridan, and I remember pulling over at one point. I talked to you a couple times during the day. At one point that evening, I talked to Representative Larson, and he said, well, you must have experience dealing with things like this. When was the last time something like this happened? And I said, Representative Larson, this has never happened, as long as I've been the president of the college. And that was fine. We hung up the phone. And later that night, I thought, it probably has happened a lot here. I just don't know that we ever stopped long enough to say, wow, there's, and I have to admit, my own first responses were protect the college, get this off the internet, let's stop talking about this. And I have a lot of very smart people who work for me, and they just wouldn't let that. They said, no, we're going to, this is not about damage control and keeping it off the front page. This is about confronting an issue, and they were right, and I'm glad that we've done that. And so started for me this personal, I've 90 days of just learning and reading and thinking and looking at data, and I remember when I first came to Wyoming, I came here from New England in 2005, and I read every book I could get my hands on about the space between the Black Hills and the Bighorn Mountains and all these wonderful things that had happened. And I spent, I was in Gillette probably the first month, and I said, where are all the Native Americans? I didn't actually ask anybody that. Where are all the Native peoples? Because we didn't have them at the college. We didn't really have them in the community. So that came back to me too. And then the third little vignette I want to share with you is right after these incidents, I met with all of the families. I met with the families of the first two students the very next day. When I got back to Sheridan after the Cheyenne meetings that night, the next morning I met with the families. And the response of the families was, we're taking our family back home, because this is just another example of breaking our trust. And that's what always happens. I'm paraphrasing. And so in that instant, I saw this as a continuation of promise after promise after promise. And our family's going to come to your college, and they're going to be safe, and they're going to learn, and they've got this opportunity. And here's the promise is broken again, so we're getting out of here. Now the students said, no, Mom and Dad, we're staying. We're going to, and I'm very proud of that fact that they weathered this. Two of the three affected students did. So those are just three comments that I don't have any answers. I'm just learning, and my institution is learning. We're a learning institution. We don't know everything. We want to try to figure this out and try to turn something that was a very sad incident, shocking, embarrassing incident into something positive. And I think many of the faculty and staff here are seeing as part of our responsibility to do that. So,
Find that very commendable. I've been to many institutions that would have handled this as a public relations issue and tried to make it go away as quickly as possible. Okay, we're going to wrap up this first part of the agenda. Matthew, do you have any final concluding remarks to the presentation or what you've just heard?
Just brief. 90 seconds. Elevator speech. No, I think they were all great points, and absolutely, and I think Kyle for reminding us about the humanization part of it, right? And I think that's often the real issue is humanizing people, right? And so whether it's things we see in society, whether it's, oh, we need police officers with cameras or whatever else, or whatever things are going on. But what we really need to do is to see each other as human beings. Right? I'm a human being and you're a human being, and we have similar emotions and feelings, and we both probably like sports, or we might like the same team, right? There's more commonality amongst us that we sometimes forget or don't see. And so I think that's important aspect to remember, and it's easy to forget, and sometimes I do that as well. Right? Maybe I get mad at a waiter for not doing something, and I'm like, oh, and then suddenly I'm not seeing that person as a human being, right? And so I'm thinking about myself. So really, that's what I encourage people to do. I thank the students for being here, and I appreciate you getting your education, and I see you, and you're doing a good job. And I encourage you to keep up doing a good job. And we're all here to support you, and whatever you may want to do. And so just know that you're not alone, and that we are here, and we are expecting big things from you.
Some of you talked about the invisibility of American Indians, and I've noted that increasingly in the data. It's hard to find specific information. But can you imagine if the suicide rate and the rate of domestic abuse and violence and alcoholism and disease were what it is in the Indian community, if that was prevalent nationwide, what kind of a national disaster emergency would be called? And yet we see this going all the time in Indian country, and it's like there's a silence, an invisibility. For that, I commend the college for stepping up. Okay, so thank you very much. I think that was successful. It certainly, I'm sure, got all our gears turning. And so I'd like, what I'd like to do now is open it up to our panel members. And I want to just again say that I think what we need to do, because we've been invited by the president and the institution, is to help provide some specific ideas, recommendations that might be realistically implemented, keeping in mind this is a small two-year college, don't have unlimited resources, but what might this institution do to help improve both the educational experiences and outcomes? And as we know, outcomes are dependent on experiences. If you do not have a welcoming experience and you don't feel comfortable, it's very likely you're not going to stay the course and get that degree. And then I don't want you to forget this, and that is, what can we do to help the broader non-native community come to terms with the history that you talked about, with the issues that we've been discussed, so that in fact this can be a community-wide effort and this not be a typical reservation border town, but an enlightened community that is inclusive and welcoming of all people. So with that, I'm going to just raise your hand. We'll open up, we'll have a discussion for about 30, 40 minutes, and then we'll let our audience participate. Yeah, Paul.
In the email that was sent out to us on the agenda, or just some of the things we were expected to talk about, was to provide the context of unique challenges that American Indian college students face. And I have a bunch of solutions here written down, but I think before we talk about the solutions, we can talk about those unique challenges. Some of those unique challenges have to do with language barrier. When we come from Crow to here, and you try to talk to white students, the things that we say aren't funny to them, and the things they say aren't funny to us. So you have this cultural thing that's going on, and maybe you might have a group of non-Indians and then one native, and sit there and everybody kind of laughs, and the native goes, "Hey!" And then they look at her like, "What the?" And so even that kind of makes you feel not wanted. And so it's hard to fit in to a place where people talk different, look different, and look at you different. And that was just one of the challenges that I dealt with as well. And one is that if you don't have a mentor that's been down this road before you, like you said, has that experience, it's hard to muster up that go-get-em attitude when you're faced with this discrimination and racism. And so, before I go on, I just wanted to recognize somebody who was instrumental in being a mentor to me and helping me speak up and do more public speaking and raise my hand in classes, and that would be Dr. David Yarlett with Little Bighorn College. Thank you for coming, David, if you don't mind standing up. But it was people like David that gave me that extra push. And before I didn't have that, I didn't really know who to talk to about how do you deal with like feeling so uncomfortable in class, or how do you deal with these snide racist remarks. Nobody ever told me how to deal with that. And one thing I like to do is I like to fight. And so that's one of my solutions when that happens. It's like, hey, let's take off the gloves and handle this, man to man, which is the wrong way, of course. But the younger Paul Littlelight, the 20-year-old, is different from the 42-year-old Paul Littlelight. And so now I would be able to go and tell the president, hey, I'm dealing with this. And one instance that I dealt with is that when I was getting my master's, I actually used to live here. I would go over to the library, I would use the library, sit down and be quiet, but I have a blown disc in my back, and so the chairs there rock. And so there's 4 chairs up in the front, and for 4 months I would ask to borrow one of those steel chairs because it didn't rock. And so I'd take it over there, sit in it, bring it back when I was done. What happened one time when I went in there is that I believe the director was there and the normal people that are usually there weren't there. And so I went up, politely asked to use the chair, and said I was going to bring it back, and the lady looked at me like I was crazy and gave me the look, and I just said, I normally borrow it, I'll be right back. It's only like 45 minutes. And then she looked at the director, and the director looked at me and said, we're going to leave that chair there because you could probably hurt yourself taking the chair over to the table. And I said, yeah, I'm kind of a healthy man. I think I could do that. Well, there's plenty of other chairs around here. Well, I hurt myself in the military. I got a bad back, and it really helps out. And he said, no, we're going to leave that chair right there, right where it sits. I said, well, I think as a patron in the community, you would help me out with that. And he said, we're just going to leave it there. But I felt it, and I seen it, and I know some people would say, well, maybe that guy's having a bad day. But that's an excuse, and I know what was going on. So when I left, I told the gentleman, this should be a simple thing for you to do. And what he said to me was, I'm sorry, but that's the way it is around here. And I never went back to that place. And so those are some of the challenges that we deal with. See, he didn't say, hey, dirty Indian, go find another chair. Go sit somewhere else. But it was another form, different from what it used to be in the 60s and the 70s. It's subtle. So I'll let other people talk on that.
Let's have full discussion here. Kyle, do you want to follow up on some of your emotional but very, very important contributions? You mentioned, for instance, suicide, and the rates are so alarming among young people in the Native community. It's literally a crisis level. I'm not trying to focus just on one issue, but how do you think a community that wants to deal with these matters? First, you have to acknowledge that the problem exists. Most of the communities I visited, they resist. They do not acknowledge the existence of racism and discrimination. Where you have a community or an institution that recognizes and acknowledges that it's a great opportunity, what can we do? What can the institution do?
Well, I think first and foremost, as far as the institution is concerned, there needs to be a place where it's home. What helped me and what helped me stay where I eventually stayed was the place. There's a lot of research within the anthropological community about the importance of place. It was acknowledged today. This is Crow land. This is indigenous land. There's something spiritual in where you place yourself. And if you can find your place there, that's where you belong. And it's a very simple solution, requires some money, but at an institutional level, to provide a place where individuals feel like that's where they can be. Now, I oversee a program, a couple of them, for low-income and first-generation students. So the situations that these students come to the table with aren't unlike what we see within our American Indian communities. Last week, I was helping someone who was a student in our TRIO programs who was homeless. That's not uncommon in our community, you know, in low-income communities, and most of our Native people statistically fall into that socioeconomic demographic. But we have a place there at the institution where they can go, where they can seek someone to have that chair there for them. You know, that someone knows that I might not know your story, but I know your place, and that belongs here. You know, we do a lot when we ask our students to come to an institution, especially at the border town level, because it was already mentioned, the history behind that is not a safe one. You know, it's not one where I personally, where I grew, I did not feel safe leaving the reservation. I mean, I was told on numerous occasions to go back home. And that was one of the reasons that kept me where I ended up staying, is it was safer at the University of Arizona than it was back home. For the stuff that was going on in my family, for the stuff that was going on at the reservation level, but what the institution already had committed to was making sure that there was a place there for those individuals coming off from wherever they came from. And so I think that's one thing that can really help to make sure our students feel like this is home.
Heidi, somebody talked about data, and I'll get to you right now, and the absence of data. When I used to work at the commission, we would go, for instance, I went to Albuquerque to talk with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission people. I said, I want to see your complaints from Northwestern, from Shiprock, from the chapter houses. I said, we don't have any. Well, that was because there was no connection. Folks up there didn't even realize there was somewhere they could go, right? And so they actually started hiring Navajo people. And all of a sudden they got inundated with complaints. I'm just wondering if you could just briefly react to the absence of data.
Yeah, I mean, I can please talk about Sheridan College. We did look at, I was asked to come, my director and I looked at the data, and I think a total of 8 complaints came up over 25 years of our data. None of them involved race. All of them were having to do with disability. So one of the things is people need to speak up. And then also they need to make sure from the university side, the university needs to make sure that people are heard and that they're taking meaningful steps to address when they do hear things. So it's not just brushed off as they just were protecting their furniture, of recognizing that maybe something larger is happening and maybe it doesn't rise to a hostile environment situation, one incident under the law. It doesn't mean that the student doesn't feel it greater than you might think. Historical trauma is a big issue in the American Indian community, and if you don't have an understanding of what historical trauma is, you need to look it up, because you need to understand that the one incident that may seem small to someone from the outside as a white person, as a non-native person, you need to factor in and find out the history of that person, because their history impacts how they react and how they experience the world. And so you have to be aware of that, and when you're listening to what students bring to you, and you have to be aware of that when you decide how you're going to move forward and address them so that they don't happen again. So you talk to everybody about people. You have to talk to your custodial staff. You have to talk to cafeteria staff. This isn't just a professors or RA or a residence hall or a student life issue. This is your community's issue. And if we all take responsibility for it, to address it and to be mindful of what's going on, then it will get better. But if people don't gather together and learn from one another, it's not going to happen. And so I'm glad that the students were heard and that 2 of them felt comfortable enough to stay. My question is, okay, this was September, we're now in February. what has happened in between for those students? Has anybody addressed it again with them to find out, are there things, maybe minor things still happening? Are you feeling safe? What else can we as a university do? Because that follow-up is important as well. I'm sure they felt hurt in the moment, but they probably don't want to be filled like this may be too much for them. Like, yeah, okay, you're addressing some things, but you forgot the individual. So don't forget the individual students.
Elma.
And to talk to Heidi's comment, I think that Sheridan College has done an outstanding job of hearing the individual, to listen to the individuals, to ensure that they have been heard, to find mentors for those students. And so I think that Sheridan College, I would like to commend them in their response to the incidents. And so in response to that. And my first response was in response to Kyle's opening statement. You know, challenges can lead us to figure out interventions and what we can do. Because I don't know if challenges are as obvious as we think they are, and a lot of them are systemic, as Kyle had stated. A lot of them start from home. I'm one of 15 children, and education was a priority for our parents. And so out of our 15 children, nine of my parents' kids have degrees. And my brother has a law degree from the University of Oklahoma. I have a master's degree from the University of Oklahoma. My brother has a MBA from Columbia. So education was at the forefront. And so when we're talking about systematic change, it starts with the families. My parents are a true testament to the people that we have become in our community and in Indian country in general. And so I think when we start looking at the challenges, we have to remember where our kids come from, where they are, where their families are coming from. And that doesn't make my family any better than the others, because we had struggles, extreme amount of struggles. But it's because my parents believed in education. They were able to overcome those struggles. And so that's where we have to start, as at home. And because challenges aren't as obvious as we think they are. And so we really need to identify the interventions and what we can do to ensure that our children are successful at an earlier age and within the families and within the communities that they come from.
Okay, who's next? Lloyd?
So as you expressed to us to identify things that we can do to help resolve the issues, in our part of the world, in Fremont County, these are frankly issues that are not new, that we have been dealt with since I lived there when we moved there in 1980. There's always been, but we see as time goes on, things kind of get better. But what we realized a number of years ago was that when we're working with the people outside of Fremont County, their understanding of our two tribes is pretty non-existent. We debate on the floor, why do we need two tribal liaisons? And we suggest, well, why does Wyoming and Colorado need different governors? You know, it's kind of, there's just lack of understanding. And so what we embarked on through the Tribal Relations Committee, starting, I believe, in 15, was to try to come up with a curriculum that could be used in K-12 to educate our K-12 students and provide those teachers a resource to help educate the non-native population of the state about the contributions of the Native American tribes, and in particularly those on the Wind River Reservation, and provide those resources. That bill was passed last year. We have a curriculum in place, and we've opened up the social studies standards to include that in there. That sounds fine and wonderful, but you need to know that there were rocky roads getting there. We came back after the first year, had the Department of Education testifying before the committee, And what we found out, the only thing lacking on the committee is we didn't have any Native Americans. Here we were again, you know, and so time out. And the reason we found that out is because at the conference Fort Washakie, we had some upset members of the Northern Arapaho and Eastern Shoshone tribes saying, you know, if we're going to talk about Indian education, maybe you ought to get some suggestions from us, huh? I know it's a novel concept, but we thought that it was, so we postponed that whole thing for another year to involve, to get the history, an understanding of that. But it was worth the wait. It certainly was. We're excited because I don't think that change is going to be immediate, but I think once we can start educating and helping those who understand the successes and contributions of others, then when that generation gets to the point of being at Sheridan College or the University of Wyoming or one of the other community college, they're going to have some of that understanding that Mr. Littleshield, is it Littleshield? Little Light talked about, that they understand some of those cultural differences. And we think that that's really important. And that's how, you know, that's one of the things that we're really trying to move forward as a state in our educational process.
Angela.
I have a couple of things that I'm hearing from a lot of our panelists, but I want to address your comments first. I think that the Indian for all, or the education for all that Montana has done and now Wyoming has adopted is a nice baby step forward. Because it then incorporates the knowledge of our ancestors and the native people of this land. But what we see, and as someone who's been a part of the College of Education for the last 14 years at the University of Wyoming, is that the majority of our teachers in the schools are non-native. That's a problem. So we're trying to recruit Native students to become teachers so that we can see ourselves in front of the classroom, that we can have that connection, that our kids can have that connection. But on top of that, even though that's the reality, we have very few of those non-native teachers who will take the step forward to become more knowledgeable about not just the people in the state of Wyoming, but also across the country and globally. We have a program on campus called the Teachers of American Indian Children Endorsement. Dr. Tim Rush and I created that over 10 years ago specifically for that purpose, to educate mostly non-native. We have more native teachers actually than we do non-native teachers who take that endorsement program. And they're really our teachers as well. I mean, they're helping to teach the other students in the class. And what we'd like to see is more non-native teachers wanting to have that knowledge. And those that finish the courses, they get the understanding of the history of colonization and what decolonization looks like. And then we talk about microaggressions, and we talk about that covert racism, those little tiny cuts every single day that we're going through, that we get from the comment or the look or the exclusion that we're constantly seeing, that our students face every single day. And so we make sure that they're getting that understanding. It's not just about the history, it's not just about passing that along to the non-native students, but how do you do that effectively? And our motto has always been, what's good for native students, good for all students. And that is absolutely the truth. So I commend Wyoming for doing that, because not many states have done that. We're the only endorsement program in the entire country that certifies teachers to be better teachers for all students, but specifically for native students. So I think that finding a way to bridge that gap between we have the standards and now the teachers are supposed to do this. And, you know, when people see change, they are always resistant, especially when it comes to, well, why do I have to know about everybody. You know, I can't teach diversity and multicultural education because I don't have time to know everything there is to know about everybody. And that's not the point. The point is, how do you become more sensitive and inviting to other students, to all students, to be inclusive and to be sensitive to what every individual student's needs are, as opposed to what the best fit for all is, or how do I teach the middle child as opposed to the children on the margins. So that's one thing. I think in listening to and thinking about what can we do as educators to better serve the needs of our students and specifically our Native populations. We're very fortunate to have the center at the University of Wyoming. And it's only been since August since we moved in, and we have seen an enormous rise in self-esteem and community and involvement, and it's been, I'm so fortunate and honored to be a part of this. So many people before me have set the tone and paved the path to this place that we're at now. So I think that that's one thing, to have place. I think place is incredibly important, a connection to a place to gather, a place to celebrate culture, to celebrate family, and to be able to, we have kids running around the center all the time, and that's part of who we are, is the children and the elders have to be there. They have to be there to help us and to support us. So that, I think, is incredibly important. Having a place, an institution that values the counter-narrative, that values voice, is absolutely essential. I think that I've worked with a lot of Native students from Lander and Riverton. In fact, just completed a publication with an undergraduate from Riverton, and she talks about the racism in Riverton and the term park ranger that is used to define the Native people who are in the park who are drunk or are homeless or are vagrant, and that it's an incredibly racist term, and that term is used at the city employee level at such a high rate that when she was working with them and trying to feel like she wants to say something and yet she's the only one, and how can she, and she has no power. So I think it's really important that we know that they're not reporting, because why would they? I mean, how many times have we gone to speak up and been brushed to the side or dismissed, or our complaints are fallen on deaf ears? And that happens constantly. And we see it every day. And that's part of that microaggression, covert racism, that continues to be the easiest way to say, no, it doesn't exist. And so our students struggle with that on a daily basis. So lots of other things, but I think that once you have a center, you have a place for language. We teach our language classes. The Arapaho language is taught there. And that's a place for all students to come and learn. So that helps to create that community. You definitely get the backlash. I mean, there's no question. There are lots of people on campus who are like, well, why do the Indians get that? Why do they get the special treatments? I appreciated you saying that as well. And it's the lack of understanding of that history, which goes back to, we need to be teaching them at the kindergarten and the first grade and the second grade levels that this is part of who the land is and where we come from.
Very important points. Yes, Leslie.
I'll go back when you mentioned suicide rates on reservations. I just want to make a point for everybody here. In the last 45 days on a reservation, we've had 35 suicide attempts from individuals 18 and younger. And we had one successful attempt in the past couple months for a young individual. So these social issues that we're dealing with, these ideas of hopelessness are there. It's very real. And then it's almost a miracle for them to graduate. And you had that statistics, 53% graduating. It's even a miracle that some of the people even get to that point and then go on to college to even be in this type of institution and to be successful even. I guess my time in the governor's office taught me a lot about how policy can really shape people's lives. You know, Representative Larson can and the other members of the legislature or former politicians can really respect how a couple words can really change the meaning of something. Just look at the difference between shall and may and will in a bill, and it changes the total meaning in something. So my thought is, well, what's the policy here at Sheridan College? President said, well, my first response was to do damage control and cover it up. Well, what is there? There needs to be a policy to outline, this is going to be our response when incidents happen. Not just for one particular group, but for everybody. So that way they know that there's a policy, there's a system, there's a way to deal with that. Because when we deal with racism, there's the individual ones that's it's intentional. There's racism that's unintentional. They're both horrible things to have to deal with. And then there's institutional racism, which the doctor mentioned. And the institutional goes to your policies, your procedures, and even your staff and your faculty. You know, what are your hiring practices? How do you screen people? What type of people are you looking for to have these positions? Are they able to relate to the students that come to your university or your college? So when you start looking at how to deal with these issues, not only on the institution, not only in college, but in the communities, how are your policies, how are your laws, how is everything built to address different segments of your population? Because if it's just broad and doesn't take into account people's different backgrounds, their different needs, their different situations, then it's not going to be effective. And then you'll still have that people who feel marginalized. You'll have people who don't feel like they belong. And so when you want to build a community, you want to be all-inclusive. And that has to go to how your rules, your policies, and your procedures are drafted. Because those, in turn, when people say, well, incident happened, well, nothing happened. Well, what were they supposed to do? Do they have a rule to deal with it? If there is no rule, then you still have that, well, nothing happened, nothing's going to happen, nothing's going to ever change.
That Angela mentioned about a gathering place is, you know, if you want to address an issue, it's very difficult to do it alone as a single person. But if you've got a community of support, you're much more likely to actually address the issues and actually promote some kind of activism even among students. But it kind of takes a collective effort. And that's why I think a gathering place is such an important idea. Okay, who's next?
I think you also have to, when you talk about how do everyone come together and how do faculty and staff and community outside the institution come together. And it's great to have these kinds of forums where you have individuals come and want to be educated, and they're taking the step forward, right? So we're kind of speaking to the choir a little bit here, right? But at the same time, if you really want to see systemic change, you can't do the tourist approach. You have to immerse in the understanding, acknowledging your ignorance and acknowledging I want to be more. And to be able to take that step forward, you have to be uncomfortable. I mean, anytime I'm teaching a class, I'm hoping my students are uncomfortable. That if they walk out a little irritated, I did a really good job that day. Because they're thinking about it and they're sharing it with others. And maybe I lose a couple, but there's a few that I'm going to get that are going to come back and say, you know what, I really thought about that. And how do I do this or how do I do that? And you have to immerse them in it. It can't just be the tourist approach where you hand them a book and they read it and then we have a small discussion and the little things. It has to be an ongoing, it's a journey. After 25 years of doing this work, still on a journey to be a better person and to include that in my life. I mean, nobody's done.
Make yourself available to this college. If you haven't already, because these are, I'm sure, ideas.
I'll call her president. She really
And who really you need to bring her out here for a while.
I think that there's never an operator, and I can't imagine anyone at this table who would say, no, I'm not helping. I mean, we drove all this way just to come tonight, so I don't think anyone wants to turn a blind eye and not help. I mean, I think that there's always people who want to help and want to step forward and say, yeah, let me.
Paul could recruit you away, but I don't know if he could match your salary. Were you next, Matt, or Kyle, or who's, whoever,
So I don't know if I have the right answers, because I think the students will speak later in terms of what they need here, because I've only been here a short time. Well, one of the things I do know is that one of the things that can help is hiring somebody like me, or you need, or whoever it might be, someone who cares, and it doesn't have to be native or non-native, right? Where there's that ethic of care that I care about you. So when you hear about this, sometimes, because one of the easiest and hardest things to do is to actually care, right? Because it's not easy, because if you care of somebody, when they hurt, you hurt, right? And so when that incident happens, immediately you hurt, right? And so there's a cost with that. But there's also a benefit, because now if those students know that they have somebody who cares about them, right? And somebody who's checking in on them, not just when something happens, but who checked on with them like last week, right? Who checked on with them a couple of weeks ago, right? And sometimes that can be the biggest difference, especially whether it's, whether it's suicide or retention or dropout. Sometimes it's just that extra person there to say, hey, how are you doing? Or what do you need help with? In my line of work, we work with students all the time, and it could be something as simple as that maybe they have a disability, but they don't know who to go to, right? And we check in with them, and then we're able to help them and navigate that. And so my personal belief, a lot of times people don't, especially if sometimes older generations, or even my generation now, I guess I'm getting the older generation, is I believe in hand-holding. Right? Because sometimes we're like, oh, you got to do it by yourself. You got to pull yourself up and do that by yourself. But when we look at all the people who are succeeding, they're getting their hands held, right? Harvard's got it, and the Ivy League's retention rates in the high 90s. They get so much support, right? Again, they have higher achieving students who really come in, but they're getting support. There's nothing that they're not needing. They're getting financial support. They're getting their hands held, right? So students sometimes need their hands held. Sometimes they may not advocate for themselves, even though that's what we want and we're trying to teach them to do it. But sometimes we got to go in there and do the dirty work and help them. I had to help my brother write his resume yesterday because he waited for the last minute to apply for a job. Hopefully he's not watching. And he's like, oh man, I need a resume. I don't have a resume. I don't know how to do this. So I had to help him write a resume last night before I came here, right? So sometimes we have to really care about these students, and I know people in student affairs generally, they do. And so it's really seeing that Native student and really checking in on them and doing that and having somebody there, whether it is a Native center or another Native staff or faculty. And I'm not sure if we have one here on campus, but I mean, that's a start. So.
Yes. Sorry. No, I'll go ahead, Carl.
I just wanted to mention, one of the hats I used to wear in a previous life was financial aid counselor for the Hopi Tribe Grants and Scholarships program. And one thing that we knew as counselors and working with the different institutions, because we would go to the different institutions in Arizona where we had students enrolled. And we knew which schools had strong support systems. We knew which financial aid counselors to talk to. We knew which support programs were there. And I have recommended to communities and to tribes, especially those who provide funds, to do a scorecard on the institutions where they're spending their money. So are you getting the rate of return on your investment? Because at the very end, institutions, yes, they're higher learning, but they still are businesses. And so are tribes. Tribes are investing their students and their people into your business. And so are they getting what they need from your business? So tribes themselves need to say, how many of our students are there? How many are succeeding? If they're not succeeding, what's going on? So it has a complex interaction between the administrators, the students, the families, and the tribes to basically say, okay, here we have a scorecard of all the institutions in the state of Wyoming. Our students are going to this school and completing at higher rates than this school. This is where we should probably focus our attention for right now. We don't know the ultimate end details at this point as to what occurrences are really happening within that system, but institutions speak numbers. Institutions speak data. We're measured on how many years it takes our students to graduate. We're measured on how many students are coming in so we can pay for all of this. You know, so the tribes themselves should be asking, how much am I investing in you and are you providing that to me?
It's all about accountability. I think Dr. Young, okay, Alma and then Dr. Young.
That Kyle is talking about. For example, the Northern Arapaho Tribe has been awarded approximately $4.8 million in the last 20 years in higher education funds. And out of that $4.8 million, only $500,000 has stayed within the state of Wyoming because students choose not to come to Wyoming, to community colleges, to the University of Wyoming because of the racism that they experience in their own border towns. A lot of our money goes out of state. And those students that we find most successful, those universities have a place. They have that place where they can feel connected, where they can find, if it's a person, but more realistically, if it's a place where they can go and be with people who are similar to them. One of the most powerful comments that I got from a University of Wyoming student is, now I finally feel like I belong once they got the house. And so it's those type of things that are going to retain our students in higher education. And we have spent a lot of money outside of the state of Wyoming, and we would like to spend that money here within the state. If we could find a way to keep our kids here without these type of incidents happening to them.
I know you, John, you want to pull the audience in here, but just real quick, I've got pages and pages of ideas, and there's a certain alignment between what I'm hearing and some ideas that we have. I know when Alma hosted me down and I met with Dr. Brown, and your idea was, you know, concretely mention orientation and doing more in orientation to address things like the language barrier. And you said you had a list of those kinds of things. I got language barrier. Maybe if we can get some more of those things. I think we're planning those kinds of things for our student orientation. The place is being planned as we speak. There will be a place on this campus. Policy and procedures are being reviewed. To be honest, though, and I think that's important. But personally, what I'm concerned about is staff and faculty not understanding how to respond in the instant where something happens. In a classroom where there's a conversation and there's one American Indian Native student and something sort of uncomfortable happens, and then as a faculty, let's just get over that and keep going on with the. And I think I've got to help and I've got a lot of my team here tonight. I think we're going to find our policies and procedures are pretty good. It's learning how to act, which maybe seems obvious, but it's not. It's knowing how to do something in the moment it happens so that you can correct a situation and how to respond, as opposed to just thinking, gosh, this is uncomfortable. Let's get along to the end of class or get along to the end of the situation. So, and then measuring success. So just wanted to, I'm hearing some of these are ideas we're talking about. And it's interesting, of the 12 or 13 or 14 things we've talked about, these sound like priorities for our future work.
Well, unfortunately, I'm not a panelist because I have 10 or 12 ideas. But maybe I'll submit those to you in writing later. Yeah, go ahead, Paul. We're going to wrap up here.
One thing I wanted to mention was a story. Was that when I was in the military, I must have been there 3 months, and there was I think 7 people in my section. There was me, Native American, there was a black gentleman in there, there was an Irishman, there was an Italian, there was a Filipino, there was a Puerto Rican, and then there was a white guy. So in this, we used to fight a lot. We used to call each other names. Hey, there, you speak. Hey, what up, chief? And we would fight physically. And one day, our section chief said, I want you guys to learn about each other's culture when you come back tomorrow, but I'm going to smoke you right now. And so he worked us to death, and getting smoked means you do push-ups, run in circles, and bounce on your head, and just do all this crazy stuff till you're almost dead. So the next time we were out in the field, I happened to go into the library and look up Malcolm X, and I was about 20 years old then. And found out when black people became citizens, when they got the right to vote, and then looked up some Italian information and then some Irish information. And so when we went back, my section chief said, "So what did you guys learn?" And everybody else kind of looked away. And then I raised my hand and I started spitting out some information. And so after that, he smoked everybody but gave me a popsicle and let me sit in the shade and watch him. And part of that story is about, we're talking about trying to educate each other on culture and our backgrounds. And when I was at Rocky, one thing that I would hear from non-Indian students would be like, how come we have to learn this Native American culture? How come you're shoving this down our throats? We shouldn't have to learn this. And then in class I said, oh, how does that feel when a culture or someone's shoving another culture down your throat? And you have to learn about George Washington and all this stuff that doesn't apply to you. And so I would encourage the college to kind of work it in a way, the way it worked in the military for us is that we became battle buddies. We became a unit. We needed to survive. It didn't matter the color of our skin. We were all green. And so if you can put it together here where all these students are in the same boat, that would be awesome when they're all rowing the same way. Because when you feel a part of, like you said, you feel like you belong. But when sometimes I take a commercial break, so if I pause, I'm taking a commercial break. But I did forget what I was going to say, so I'll stop there.
Well, thank you very much, Paul. Yeah, I will just mention one thing because it's a program at Arizona State University. The former chair or president of the Navajo Nation, Peterson Zaw, I don't know if any of you know him, but he's a good friend of mine. He went to ASU, and what they set up there was a mentoring program. So every kid coming off the Navajo reservation, going to Tempe, Arizona, had a mentor assigned to him or her. And that individual worked directly with that student to make them feel comfortable, to acclimate, to help them academically, to help them with computers, and the success rate just shot up. And I know that takes some resources, but it really was effective. It worked very well. We're not closing the discussion, but actually we're going to open it, if that's okay with everyone at this point. And what I'd like to do, and I probably don't need a microphone, I speak up pretty well, but if someone can hand me one if they want.
My name's Kiana, and I'm from California. I came here because I like to travel, and I like seeing different things and different cultures. What happened to them could easily have been prevented. I know Dr. Young, I think that's your name, you were talking about your faculty and your staff. And I believe that, man, I don't know his name, I'm so sorry, but the one in the blue shirt right there. Mr. Shakespeare, sorry. I believe it was him that was talking about how the vetting processes in your policies need to be changed or need to be looked at. And I think that's something you guys really need to, make importance of. Because, yeah, it stems from families, the hatred and all that stuff. But when you have experiences in a classroom where you are bawling your eyes out because a professor thinks it's okay to talk about Hispanics in California and all of the hatred stuff, and he's basically preached hatred in a U.S. history class, is ridiculous. And the fact that he still works here really angers me. But, you know, I can't change anything. This happened my first year here. So when I heard that this happened to other people by students, it really angered me. And I wasn't here last semester because of family issues. But when all this happened, I immediately looked to one of my closest friends that went through the whole thing with me. And she even said that this didn't need to happen. Like, it could have been prevented, but it's not, because people don't listen. And before all this happened, Larissa came up to me and said that you can't change a culture overnight, which is completely true, and that's fine and everything. But if you have the power to, you know, make that change and not have that hatred being preached in a school that, in a class that I'm paying for, that would be great. Okay.
We just say community engagement and support. Carrying college can't do it alone. It is a broader community that includes leadership, all segments of the community, that it takes everyone in the community working together, not simply the education. Okay, who's next?
I do have a question. If you see me walking down the street, what do you envision? Do you envision me as one of you? Do you envision me as the Native American I am? Or do you see me as an Asian tourist dressed up as a Native American? I say that because we're all unique. We're all unique, but we're not lesser than each other. We're all equal. My name is David Yarlett. I'm president of Little Bighorn College. I'm a proud alumnus of Little Bighorn College. Went on, got my bachelor's, my master's, and while I was working on my doctorates, I got recruited back to Little Bighorn College to come and serve as their president. I see one of our employees here, Matthew. I also chair the American Indian College Fund. I also chair the American Indian Higher Education Consortium. I also chair the Montana Tribal College Presidents Association. There's many others, but I also got selected to serve as an international advisory member for the World Indigenous Nations Games to represent the United States. So I've gotten to see a little bit of the world, a little bit of things that go on. I fought fire for 24 years, rangeland fire, through the education system. You have to speak a little bit louder. You have to speak a little bit longer than your colleagues to be heard. You have to bite the bullet and show them that you're the right person or the wrong person to pick on, depending on which viewpoint that they have. So it's those kinds of things that I had to battle through. And we have spoken long and hard at every level, at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, and now at the international level. I'm really proud of these students that got up and spoke. They spoke from the heart. We did that for years and years, and we are finally being heard. I'm proud to say that Montana, with the Montana Indian Education for All, was a step in the right direction. We went to the state legislature, speaking to be heard. Now we're invited guests regularly at the legislature to testify on the behalf of our students. Now I have a seat at the Board of Regents for the university system to go listen in, to provide input. And just this past June, I got appointed to the commission for the Northwest Accreditation Body. We have a permanent seat with the accreditation body. Through the university system, we get invited to their meetings, the orientations, and we get to voice the concerns of our students that are going to the university system. What are their needs? People, staff, administrators that deal with our Native students are present at this meeting. When we first started, it was they came in and did a presentation, and without hearing our responses, they would walk out before they heard our concerns. But that has changed. I just share this with you because change can happen. We can all be working together by respecting each other's uniqueness and working together and resolving issues. And if you see it firsthand, be the first ones to step up. And I will say that I really commend Sheridan College. I saw it on Facebook. And just like one person saying, I felt like the parents coming in and wanting to take their students home. Being a tribal college president, I had that same feeling. Those are our Native students. I'm going to go down there and take them out of school and have them come to our school. But I'm glad they stuck it out. And, you know, if anything, I'm glad that this is happening. But lip service doesn't go very far. It takes action. So we hope to see that there's progress being made. Whatever recommendations and what have you are going to be placed forward. And at some point, I'd like to come back and see what progress has been made. Thank you very much.
That I wanted to mention was that when you talked about the Farmington working down there in Chamberlain, some of the information that I got was based on this discrimination against Native Americans in border towns, which was a briefing before the United States Commission on Civil Rights held in Washington, D.C. And so some of the things that I wrote down, the ideas from that was the Cultural Awareness Program, Community Relations Commission, the Native American Liaison, mentor programs, and I think just to notify the community, I mentioned this before, but accurate reporting of the severity of discrimination in Sheridan would really show that measuring stick to the non-Native community. Hey, look at this. This is like huge. They're getting all this backlash and we're watching it happen and doing nothing. And so other ideas is one thing I mentioned was that the 42-year-old Paul is way different from the 20-year-old Paul. And when I was in the military, I asked this gentleman, he was my sergeant, he was Puerto Rican, and I asked him, I said, oh, you speak Mexican? And he said, mira, Pablo, come here, let me talk to you real quick. We speak Hispanic. And so, I don't know where I was going with that, but what he did was he helped me kind of articulate what I wanted to say. And so as Native Americans at that young age, when I felt that racism and that discrimination, and we listened to the young ladies in here and talk, and we could feel their emotions. To me, what they said, I heard it in my spirit. But sometimes when we want to express our complaints, it's hard for us to articulate the emotions that we're feeling. How did they make you feel? You know what? They made me feel ashamed, not welcome, and then I had anxiety, and then I was in fear, and then dang, my heart started beating fast, and I thought I was going to have a heart attack. I went to the hospital, I just had anxiety. And so helping us articulate what we're feeling is important, because then it can put it on paper, or people can hear it and understand what we're going through. Because some of the times when we go through that discrimination, it's emotionally powerful, where you get overwhelmed with how you're feeling. And you go home and say, what happened? And your mom asks you what happened. Oh, those guys were being buttheads. But what happened? Oh, they were just being no good. I know, but what happened? They're racist. I know, how did they make you feel? But you can't articulate that inside of how you're feeling. You can't express those emotions. And when high school students come to college, and if they came from that background where they don't have that experience and that mentorship, when they get to this place, it's hard to express that, and the only solution for them is, I'm getting out of here. And so that's my address to that question.
Just say, we only have just a very few minutes.
Backing off of Paul, when our students from St. Stephen's came down a couple years ago and were discriminated against in the university bookstore, and the university did not react and covered it up, and oh, it wasn't our fault, and didn't acknowledge what had happened, we lived with that pain for years. And just recently, when we did the opening for the center, President Nichols apologized for it openly, with Dick McGinnity, the president at the time of the discrimination, sitting in the audience, flipping through his email, sitting right next to my son and I, not acknowledging. But the fact that she sat there and acknowledged and apologized and said, this will never happen again, that was huge. Huge in that we took a step forward. You have to acknowledge the pain. If you don't acknowledge the pain, and then you are just, it's just damage control again. And beyond that, your actions speak louder than words. What you do after that speaks volumes. And what she's done since then to rectify that discrimination and the discrimination of so many other students of color on our campus is huge. It will speak volumes to what the university is saying is important to them, and that their actions speak louder than words.
Thank you. My name is Ivan Small. I'm the director of schools for St. Lebre Catholic School, and I want to thank you for inviting our students to be your students. Some things I think we need to look at. You says, what do we do? Heard a comment, if they don't acknowledge racism in the classroom, they don't deal with that. Well, we all have a sense of racism within ourselves. We have to acknowledge that. When this happened to our young lady, I was in San Diego, and I got the word, and I called our dorm supervisor. I says, Facebook her and have her call me, have her mom call me. Well, she called me, and I visited with her to pray real hard for what's happening to you, but especially pray for that other person who has that broken heart to do this. And so I think that answers some of the lady's question about what do we do? Sometimes I'm afraid to say, okay, let's blow this Indian thing up here, and let's hold them out there. And that would really feel good to me. But we have to look at other people's feelings. How do they feel about us being put out there? And I guess for that teacher in that classroom needs help. Don't waste that teacher. Help them. Help them learn to respond to those things. Likewise, help this community respond if they see something or some act? How do you respond? How do you respond to that? How do you acknowledge that and deal with it in that classroom at that time? That's a teaching moment. What we try to do in our school is not only push high academics, but we look at the social and emotional being of our students. Talk about behavior. Talk about stick-to-itiveness. That's what makes a good student. And that's the help. We have a mentor here. We hire a mentor to see, talk to, Facebook, meet with every one of our graduates out of St. Lebre. And you're seeing a lot more of our kids reaching out. Not that our colleges in the state of Montana aren't that bad. They're pretty good colleges and universities. But our students are starting to spread their wings. And that's because of their social and emotional health. And that's again, look at that teachable moment for those teachers and every adult in this school. And I went to school in Durango, so I was down around Farmington quite often. So, well, thank you. And I really thank you folks for acknowledging and stepping up as a community and a school to address this issue. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, let's let Chairman Brown. He's patiently waiting in the back there. Finally, I remember that social studies class with our Chairman Brown. We were plotting to take over the reservation at that time. And here we are, so many years later. I think we're mission accomplished. No. But we also have these little competitions on who gets the last word sometimes at these events, and I let him go first so I could have it this time. But my comments I wanted to direct to the students as well, because I think it's important that they know that this is an important issue. You have support, and just remember why you're here. Remember what brought you here. Remember where you want to go. Remember what you want to be. You may have to work twice as hard to get half as far as other students, but believe me, it's worth it. When you graduate, when you're getting your career going, it's worth it. Believe me, I know. I was at the University of Wyoming. I remember a faculty member who I looked up for, got advice from. I had left, forgot something in the office, came back and overheard. Said, that student, he's going to drop out. He's going to be done. He's not going to succeed. A couple years later, I was graduating. We had an honoring of graduates. I invited that faculty member. And I thanked everybody who supported me. But more importantly, I thanked the people who were against me because they gave me the motivation to succeed. And success is the greatest achievement you will have. And so all the people who doubt you, all these little things that come up, when you succeed, it's worth the journey. So just remember that.
Thank you, and a round of applause for our tremendous facilitator. It's hard to say anything that can top the comments of our panelists. On one level, I think if you think about this problem on a really grand scale, you can see the history of higher education in this country as a history of overcoming exclusions. The very first institutions on this continent were set up for white male Protestant ministers. And only later did Thomas Jefferson think of including other white male Protestants. And then came America's historic black colleges and universities, women's colleges, and access for other underrepresented and minority populations. In every single case, access to education was the antidote to social and economic inequality. And I think on that grand scale, dealing with this barrier and this obstacle is critical for this population. But on a local here and now scale, I'm just so proud to have students like this at my college, and I'm so proud that they'll speak up and that they'll stay. I apologize to the parents for those incidents, and I apologize to the Native peoples who are here today on behalf of Sheridan College. We're ashamed and sorry of what happened here, and we're going to work very, very hard to improve the experience for all of our students. This wouldn't be possible. Almost my full board of trustees is here tonight, and I just want to mention them, including Chair Norleen Healy, Deb Wetland, Jerry Eichel, Bruce Hoffman, Bob Leibrick, and I see Walt Rogge there, and thank you to the board. There are more. If I start naming, I'll name one county commissioner who's a former president of the institution, Dr. Steve Meyer. The other county commissioners here. Several of our state legislators are here. Thank you. Mayor Roger Miller is here. Members of the city council. Thank you so much for being willing to be here and be part of this conversation with us. I want to say thank you to Dr. Leah Barrett and all of the staff that helped her, Claire Barnes, Andrea Morgan, Kirk Viren running the soundboard, Wendy Smith, and all the other folks involved with the college. And it's a little hard to sit here and hear criticism like this. But we call ourselves a learning institution. We talk about continuous quality improvement. I think we're all going to learn the meaning of those concepts and those terms as we move forward. Thank you so much to these panelists who traveled a long ways and gave us hours and hours now of great material to work with. Appreciate it. Have a good evening. We've got a pizza oven outside and a coffee shop, and the panelists have said it really doesn't get hopping here till about 12:30, 1 o'clock in the morning. So if you really want to hang out and see the students, they come later. So thank you and good night.